Hey guys, welcome to Horology Biology. On this episode, I have got in an Omega Seamaster Socket Timer chronograph. Now these watches are mad fresh, as you can clearly see. This is the reference number 145.020. Now inside you've got the caliber 861, which is a hand wind movement, and it's been used in many Omega chronographs, including most famously the Speedmaster Professional, the Moonwatch. They used it too. Now this watch came to me and it wasn't working good at all. It had a lot of chronograph issues, and I found some serious things in this watch which was seriously not fresh. You guys are going to see exactly what I found later on in the video. So guys, get your coffee on, get all comfy and juicily warm in your favorite armchair, and let HB take you on this watch restoration journey. So kicking it off for the first half of this match, we are going to do the strip down. Now for those that don't know, that basically means that I am going to break this watch down to every single individual element. Every screw is going to be removed, every cog, every wheel, etc., etc. It's absolutely imperative that we do this so that we can fully inspect everything, we can pre-clean everything, then we can deep clean everything, and of course rebuild the watch so that it's going to be back up to spec as it should be. So I've removed the watch from the case and basically put the winding stem and the crown back into it so that I can remove the hands from the watch. Now there's a lot of hands on here, as you can see, hands all over the place. It's not like a normal watch, it's a chronograph, so you got a lot of hands. I'm using a Presto tool to remove these, and as you can see, I'm only removing the sweeper. And the reason I'm doing this is, these are delicate and they have a long pipe. And I find that if you just go at it with a pair of hand levers, you're going to put stress on that pipe and you might potentially break it, and that's going to cause you a problem because then you're going to need to replace the hand. Once I've got that off, I then use traditional hand levers to work my way around the rest of the hands, and I just gently lever these off of the dial, and of course I'm going to put those away, keep them safe until we need them later on. I really like the way that the hands have really maintained this really nice orange glow as well. I mean, considering this is an early 70s watch, they still look really bright, which is, yeah, super cool as far as I'm concerned. Now the dial is held on with two screws, one on each side. Basically just going to unscrew these so that I can loosen the dial feet, and then I can gently coax the dial off of the movement. These are the things that you need to do in order to obviously access the rest of the watch. So I'm putting the dial away into a nice case, keeps it safe while I'm not using it, and of course I don't want to cause any stress or damage to it because it is in really nice condition for its age. It's got a really nice patina on there, and I don't want to cause any damage to it, guys. So I'm just going to put that away, keep it safe. Now once that's off, obviously now I can tackle the movement and continue to break this down. So I'm starting on the dial side, and I'm actually going to remove the chronograph parts for the 12-hour register. So I'm removing the springs first so that I relieve any kind of tension that's held in the watch. That's really important. Next, of course, I'm going to remove this bridge, which is covering up the 12-hour runner and the other levers that make it function. Now, it's not often that I get jealous about a watch that I get in, but I must admit, when I'd finished this one, I didn't want to send it back. I really didn't. I was thinking, how can I not send it back? I mean, there's no way that I can not send it back because I know the guy pretty well. But I must admit, I was a little bit jealous because this watch really, really looked good in the end. I did a lot of work on this. It did need to have quite a few parts changed because there was some very, very unexpected things that I found. But that's how it works with vintage watches, guys. Unfortunately, when you're buying them, unless you can actually look inside and strip a watch down, you don't actually fully know what you're buying. And the other thing as well is, you don't know who's been working on it before. And I'm telling you now, I wouldn't mind a conversation with the person that was working on this prior, and I would like to ask them a few questions about their particular style of choices that they did on certain things, and especially involving glue. Not normal. So I'm just removing the rest of the components here. This is like a dial spacer bridge. Similar on the Valjoux 72, they have one as well. I'm just going to remove that and pop that to one side. Now there's not a massive amount of corrosion on this watch, which I'm really happy to see, especially with there being so many parts that are involved with a chronograph. I mean, there are so many more compared to, let's say, that's your normal automatic or normal hand wound watch. So of course, when things go wrong, or if they're heavily corroded with rust and you can't fix them or you can't clean them, then of course you're going to need to replace them. And that's when things can get really, really expensive. So I've left the keyless works alone on the dial side for now, and I've flipped the movement over. And now, of course, I'm going to continue tackling the chronograph side. Again, as a tip for you guys, you probably know this already, but for some people that don't, always remove your springs first. Be careful when you do it because they can obviously fly across the room, but you want to relieve all the tension that's held in for the chronograph parts and basically just make it easier on yourself. The last thing you want is things flying around. The other thing that I do as well, and people have asked about this before, is I only do it really on chronograph watches because there's a lot more screws involved and you cannot remember every screw which goes where because they're all different sizes, all different thicknesses, and the easiest way to basically deal with it is just put the screw back where you got it from. It's just a lot easier to do that. I mean, for me now it's just become like second nature, so yeah, it's basically what I do. Now, obviously this is different compared to the Valjoux 72s that you see me work on. This is a cam-based chronograph, whereas the Valjoux 72 is column wheel based. So this basically is a lot harder when you press it to start and stop and reset the chronograph. So I'm just letting down any tension that's left in the watch. That's also best practice. Remove all the wind that's in there because the last thing you want is your mainspring flying around. That would not be cool, guys. No, sir. You do not want that. Continuing the chronograph side, I am going to remove the hammer now. Quick inspection of everything. But these are really, really nice movements. I own a 1972, I believe it is, Speedmaster Professional Mark II. It has got an 861 inside as well. And I must admit, these are really, really nice movements to work on. Now I'm just using my tweezers here just to basically hold down because there's a lot of tension that's held under that part that I'm removing. And again, it's not something that you want to basically have flying across your room. 861 parts are not the cheapest. They're not the most expensive, of course, but they're not the cheapest. And of course, if you lose things, then you're going to have to basically replace them if you can't find them. And that's not cool. No, sir, it's not. Now there's actually 3 different reference numbers out there for the Seamaster Soccer Timers. You've got the 145.016, the 145.019, and of course this one, the 145.020. They all look a little bit different, but of course they have got the same movements inside. And Omega didn't seem to really advertise these that much back in the day. I mean, it has the 45 marker on there, which is basically advertising it that it's for football matches so that you can the referees could basically time the match between 45-minute intervals. Now, whether they did or whether they didn't, I actually have no idea. So maybe somebody could enlighten me on that because I would also really like to know. So I've just removed the coupling. And one thing that I do like about the 861, also very different to the Valjoux 72, you can actually fully break down the coupling and remove the wheel that's in the middle. On the Valjoux 72, you can't do that. It's completely a fixed piece. So if a part breaks, then you need to replace the entire unit. It's completely sealed and you can't basically break it down. This one's a little bit sticky, but at least we can get in there and of course we can fully clean it properly as it should be done. So just removing some of the springs and now I can take off this chronograph bridge. Very strange looking bridge. Looks like an alien's head. Very strange. Quick inspection and I can put that to one side. Taking off the chronograph runner and here we can find our first problem. There's no pivot. No pivot at all. And the thing is, I never even found where the pivot was, but it's not on the watch. So I'm wondering if somebody knew about that and they obviously put it back into the watch because I could not find the pivot anywhere within the rest of the movement. I mean, it is plausible that I've missed it because obviously it's very, very small, but there was no pivot on the top of that chronograph runner. So that's one part that we're obviously going to need to replace. So just removing the balance. Now, I usually do this right at the beginning when I'm servicing a watch. I remove the balance and put it to one side. But in this case, as I was on the dial side, I decided to go for those chronograph 12-hour parts first. and then basically just deal with this balance later on. It is best practice that you get your balance away from the movement as soon as possible, because the last thing that you want to do is obviously damage your hairspring. So just taking off the pallet bridge, held in with these 2 screws, and I can gently just pry this off, and then I can release the pallet forks that are underneath. And so far, a lot of things are actually looking not that bad at all. Like I said, I'm not seeing a big amount of grease or anything like this, no massive oil buildup. And of course, most importantly, I'm not seeing any rust, which is also a very, very good sign, and especially for a watch of this age. Because that is the worst enemy when it comes to watches. Rust equals corrosion, which equals damage, which basically equals money. Now the escape wheel has its own little cock. It's completely separate, as you can see, and it's only just for the escape wheel, hence being an escape wheel cock. Gently taking that out, very, very fine wheel, and you really do want to take care of it because it's got very, very fine pivots. Now the trainer wheel bridge is huge. As you can see, this is covering about 40, well, how much would I say, 80% of the entire movement. It's massive. It's held in with 3 screws, and of course you need to be careful when you take this off. Now this spring evaded me, and I was just about to release it, and then at the last minute I was like, hey, you're missing something, man. You forgot to deal with this. Because the last thing I wanted to do was lift that off and then lose a spring. That would not be cool, not at all. So gently prying it off, taking my time, and then I can just lift it off in one go. And it is absolutely huge. It really is a big bridge. So just removing the train of wheels, and they're actually looking not too bad. Until of course I got to the 4th wheel, which unfortunately is quite a bit bent. So that's another part that is on our list to have a replacement sent in. They are a little bit notorious, unfortunately, these 4th wheels, for getting quite bent because they have 2 very long extended pivots on them. And unfortunately, that is something that can happen. Now just removing the barrel, and underneath you have got the driving pinion for the 12-hour chronograph. Now, I had exactly the same issue on my Speedmaster where my 12-hour wasn't working, and unfortunately it was down to this, with having some damaged teeth and basically being gunked up and not working correctly. Now I've heard they can be a little bit notorious for this, so the best thing to do is basically replace it. Now, my contact in regards to obtaining these parts, it actually came as a really good deal that it worked out more logical to buy the 1200 complete barrel with arbor and driving pinion and spring than just basically buying a driving pinion and a mainspring. So that's exactly what I did. Now underneath the train of wheels bridge, you've got the click, and of course you have got the crown wheel as well. Just removing the click spring as well, which is actually on the top of it, held in with the 1 screw. And the spring is actually placed pretty deep in there as well, so you have to really kind of like gouge that thing out, man. So just removing the setting lever screw, then I can take out the crown and the winding stem. So I'll flip the movement back over, and now I can take on the keyless works. So this movement is pretty much getting virtually all stripped down now. Removing this massive setting lever spring, as you can see, it is pretty huge. Again, quality of it looks pretty good. I'm not seeing any massive amounts of damage, which is a really, really good sign. So, are things going to get worse or are things going to get better? We're going to have to see. So removing the minute wheel and the intermediate wheels, 2 intermediate wheels on this, as you can see, and then I can tackle the yoke spring, and the rest of the keyless components. Of course, the yoke, the winding pinion and the sliding pinion, and this is when I sew it. The Inca block is actually broken in half, and what somebody has decided to do was, let's just drop a massive amount of glue on top of this and seal it all up, and that'll basically be okay. No man, it will not be okay. That's not fresh. That's not how it should be done. It was an absolute ball ache. So that was another part that was on the list to basically replace the whole lower Inca block system. And the reason being was that the capstone was completely screwed as well. I couldn't separate them because they were basically glued together. So again, the best thing to do was basically just to replace the whole lower Inca block system. Because somebody just decided not to simply replace a broken spring. Very cheap part. They could have quite easily purchased one of those, replaced it, but out of pure laziness, that's the only thing I can think of, they basically just dropped a massive amount of glue on there. And yeah, that's not fresh, guys. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. So just pegging out these jewels, getting it all pre-cleaned, putting the balance back on, ready for the big clean. And of course now just breaking down the rest of the case, going to remove the pushers, remove the gasket, and of course the crystal.
If you're enjoying this super fresh, super nice video, I know I am, then please hit a like on this and feel free to drop a comment below. You can also subscribe to the Horology Biology channel. Make sure to check the bell icon if you do. This way you'll be notified when all the next super fresh, super nice HB goodness will be available.
So the last thing that of course we need to do now is basically just get all of the parts, stick them all into the baskets, get them all ready for the Elmer super automatic cleaning machine. We can fire it in there, everything's going to get washed, everything's going to get dried, and then we're going to be good to go for the rebuild. So it's around a week later. Finally, all my parts arrived from Switzerland. Super fresh, finally. And you know what I really like as well? I really like the way that they come in all of these little individual little plastic boxes, because I really like to collect these. Not as much as the Rodico playing around that I was talking about, but I do like these little plastic boxes and I do keep them. So all the parts are in and I'm really happy that they finally arrived. So now of course I can continue on this watch. Everything has been cleaned, everything looks good. So the first thing that I'm going to do, what I always do is I'm going to basically oil these capstones. So I'm starting on the one that is on top of the balance cock. Basically separating them, I want to basically scrub off any old oil and clean everything, and then of course I want to give it some fixer drop treatment so that when I add the oil to it, it doesn't run around everywhere and it keeps it all in the center. It doesn't leak, because that would not be cool. You only need a little bit of 90-10, cover around 70-75% of the size of the circle, and then put your stone back on. And what you're looking for is that really nice, perfect little circle in the middle of oil, which is exactly what you can see on the screen right now. Pretty cool. So just putting that back onto the balance cock, I can close the Inca block system. And then what I always do as well is, just in case there's any residue that's on there, I just use a little piece of Rodico and I just basically will give it a little once over clean. Now, of course, the next thing that we need to do is we need to remove this lower Inca block system in order to fit the new one, so that we can get rid of that messed up, glued up one that that guy completely destroyed over something that was so simple to replace. It's not normal, but welcome to watchmaking. So this is where I'm using a staking set. And like I've mentioned before in other videos, a staking set has 1,000,001 different uses. And this is going to be one of the uses that we're using right now. Now it's important that you find the right size punch that's going to fit the part that you're removing or installing, let's say. In this case, we're obviously removing it. And what I'm doing is I'm gently tapping it with a hammer to basically loosen it a little bit. I'm using a bigger die on the bottom, which has got more of a space. I'm not going to have to hit it as hard now to get it out, because I don't want to obviously damage the main plate, and that's just going to fall out and save in the die below. You don't need to go crazy when you're tapping this with your hammer. Just light taps is enough to basically get it free. And there it goes. Simple as that, guys. Not that difficult at all. The key is the preparation as far as I'm concerned. Making sure that you've got the right stake, the right size, I should say, and take your time. So now flipping the main plate over, I can install the new one. Just lining it up to fit. Looks like it's not going to fit, but of course it is going to fit because it is a tight fit. And using my stake again, I'm just basically just hammering it in taking my time. But in this case, you can actually see that I've gone a little bit too far. And I have to correct this, because if I don't, the balance is not going to spin. There's not going to be enough room for the balance staff. So I flip the main plate over, and then I will just lightly tap and level it off. Now this can be a little bit of trial and error, obviously, because if I don't do it enough, I'm going to have too much play on my balance staff, or if I've got too much, then the balance is not going to turn at all. So I obviously need to get it right. And no word of a lie, guys, I got it right first time. I'm even super surprised about that myself as well. But I'm being deadly serious. This is not the power of editing. No, sir, it's not. It genuinely did happen the first time. I'm really surprised, but that's how it went down. So I've just oiled the capstone for that, the new one, put it in place. And of course, this is now where I'm testing the balance, just to make sure that there's not too much play. And of course, that it is obviously running freely. And like I just mentioned, I'm happy to say that I was very, very happy with how it looks. I also gave it a quick test with the blower as well. I always like to do that as well, especially when I have all these capstones. I want to see how long it's going to take for it to come to a complete standstill. And I'm aiming for at least 1 minute to 1 minute 20 before it comes to a stop. And that's just with a little blow of air. Obviously, I'm not showing you that on video, because we would just be sitting watching that for 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is quite long. So moving on to part 1200, this is the complete barrel and arbor with the driving pinion. There's no spring inside, so you have to install that yourself, but you need to oil this anyway, so you would have to still open it. So it's held in with the 2 screws and that little tension spring. I can remove the pinion off and then crack open the barrel, remove the arbor as well, and then I can add a little bit of 1300, which is what I'm going to do to the inside of the barrel. Obviously, with being a hand-wind movement, I'm not using chrono grease, or I'm not oiling up the barrel wall. There's no need, because it has a brake on the spring. And then I can pop in this brand new Omega original mainspring. It's always nice when you use a new mainspring, so you don't have to use your mainspring winders. They come in these little color-coded holding tubes, or whatever you want to call it, and you can simply just use your tweezers to just lower the whole thing in, and it'll just snap all into place. So once that's in, a little bit of 1300 onto the top of the spring just for some extra lubrication, and then I can put the arbor in. This one went in relatively easy. Always helps when it's an original spring, because you know it's going to fit, basically. And you find the generic ones, sometimes you have to mess around refitting things, and that obviously takes a little bit more longer. So that can be a bit problematic. On goes the barrel lid. And then I can just snap that in place with this little press tool. Great tools, guys. You need to get one of these if you don't have one. You can pick them up for around $4 on eBay. Simple piece of plastic, but works perfectly and evenly closes up your lid. Now, adding a little bit of oil where the driving pinion is going to go. And as you can see, it has very, very fine mesh teeth. So you have to be really, really careful the way that you handle this. Just refitting the tension spring, held in with these 2 little screws. And these screws are really fine, because obviously they have to be very small, otherwise they're going to hit the mainspring underneath. So the last thing you want to do is over tighten them. So a little 1300 for where the click is going to go. Now this is on the underneath of the train of wheels bridge, that massive bridge. It's like a train of wheels bridge and a barrel bridge in one, considering it's covering like 80% of the entire size of the movement. So adding some grease, of course, where the crown wheel is going to go, and then a little 1300 for where the core will live. And that just all snaps in place, held in with the 1 screw. So what do you guys think to the Socket Timer? Is it something that you would have in your collection? Because I'll be honest, I really like this, and I've never owned one of these. I've had Speedmasters, I've even had a Flightmaster, and I must admit that was something that I actually still regret a little bit selling. Those things jumped up in price dramatically, and I had one. I sold it quite a few years ago, I mean, I can't even remember how much I sold it for. But, I mean, I think it was an okay price. But when I look back, I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have sold that because they are really nice watches as well. I'm just surprised at how much those have jumped up in value. Put it this way, what they're going for now is a lot more than what I sold mine for. That I am sure of. So just building up the train of wheels now as well, and I've put in that brand new fourth wheel. A little bit of oil for where the center wheel is going to go. And also I'll oil up as well where the setting lever screw is as well. The setting lever screw is one of those things that you must always remember to add in. I've seen it so many times happen to people, and it's happened to myself as well a few times, where you forget to put it in, you build up all your train of wheels, and then you're like, ah, shit, I forgot to put the setting lever screw in. And there's no other way of doing it. You literally will have to remove the whole bridge again just to pop in that screw. Not fresh. So gently offering the bridge to the movement, and there's a lot of weight on this bridge. And this actually works in your favor, believe it or not. It can look a bit daunting because of the size of it, but because it's quite heavy, it doesn't move around as much, and you can find that it's actually easier to manipulate the wheels into the pivots. Now it's held in with the 3 screws, so I'm just using a little bit of pegwood just to make sure that nothing jumps out. I don't think it will on a bridge of this weight, but it's best to be safe. Now again, the escape wheel has its own individual cock, and I'm just going to add that now as well. It actually makes life a lot easier as well because it's 1 screw and it's only 1 pivot as well. So you're literally just aligning up that escape wheel. So it's not something that you can really mess up. So I'm going to tackle the pallet forks now. Now I'm putting my pallet forks in a fixer drop treatment because I obviously need to oil the exit fork, or the exit stone, sorry, of the pallet forks. And by adding fixer drop, it's going to keep the oil on the jewel and not run everywhere when I do it, because gravity is not on my side on this one, as you can see. Pallet fork bridge going on, held in with the 2 screws, and I can just nip those up. Now these things are notorious for breaking, so just do not over tighten them whatever you do. When you feel resistance, stop. That is the clue to stop. So I flipped the movement over, and now I can tackle the keyless works because I need to get some wind in this watch. And yeah, considering that the ratchet wheel and everything is underneath the bridge, you can only do it the correct way, let's say, by installing your keyless works and obviously having your winding stem in there with your crown so you can wind it up. So I've added a little bit of grease, of course, where the cannon pinion is going to go, and then I can just snap that on. That's also friction fit as well, just the same on pretty much all of them. And just add in 1300 now onto the posts for the minute wheel and the intermediates. I'll also do the same as well for where the yoke's going to go. Oh, the joys of editing. Did you see that intermediate wheel just emerge out of thin air? It's like some Jedi mind trick skills. So add in the yoke. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of grease as well where it's going to connect with the setting lever. Metal on metal parts like that, you do need to use a nice grease. And the 9354, I believe it is, 9354 or 9345, somebody correct me. The Mobius grease works really well on this movement. So adding in the setting lever spring. It's a big one, but as you can see, it also works as a plate for the minute wheel and the intermediate wheel, so it keeps everything locked down, so nothing's going to jump away, which is great. And now, of course, I can wind up the watch. So I want to add a little bit of wind. I don't need to fully wind it, because obviously I'm going to need to do some oiling now and oil those pallet stones. So using 9010, I'm just oiling up the fourth wheel, the escape wheel, the rest of the trainer wheels. And for the center wheel, I'll use 1300. and just let that soak in. You only need a little, and this is high magnification, so it really helps. So just oiling up the exit jewel on the pallet forks. I repeat this process 3 times, and I also move the pallet forks so that each of the teeth of the escape wheel get a little bit of oil. Balance is going back in, and as you can see, it's fired up straight away, so I'm really happy about that. Obviously, I'm not seeing any issues with the Incablox system that I installed, which is good. And now I can start on the chronograph features. So let's start on the 12-hour register part, which is obviously underneath the dial, and we can build all this up. Adding in the runner, very, very fine mesh teeth, and this is where you really need to be careful with these chronograph wheels because they have a very different teeth system, let's say, to normal wheels. They are micro fine and they damage very, very easily. You could even damage them with your tweezers if you're not careful because they are so fine, these teeth. They're like little needles, seriously. So just securing everything with the bridge. That's going to be held in with 3 screws. But I really do like the cleaning products that I use because, I mean, you can see it in the images. The quality of the shine from the brass, it really comes out nice. I still can't get over the glue of that lower Incablox system, guys. Curious what you guys think about that in the comments. Who in their right mind seriously thinks, you know what, I'm not going to replace a $10 spring, which probably is even more than what it's worth anyway. You probably get it cheaper than that. And I'm just going to drop a big dollop of glue all the way in there and that will do the job. Oh man, it boils my blood, man. The complete laziness. Basically just passing on the problem to somebody else down the line. And of course this could have happened years ago, and it probably did, given how, did you notice how yellow it looked, that glue? Very old, so I'm pretty sure this was many, many years ago. So adding on this dial spacer bridge. Just keeps the dial level. There's no other real purpose for it. And then I can continue with some oiling. Now I'm just adding a little bit of 9010 onto the top of this post for where this wheel's going to go, this driving wheel. Now, I don't usually do that, but because it's new, I advise it, because it will be a lot more harder to get it on otherwise. So add in the minute runner, and I'm also going to add in the new chronograph runner as well. With a pivot, I might add. It actually has a pivot, I checked. So a little 9010 at the base and then some 1300 on the post. And then I can just slide that straight in. Brand new one. Not cheap, but unfortunately 100% necessary. Otherwise you're not going to have a chronograph. And just before I put the bridge on, I'm just refitting this like click spring for the minute chronograph. It actually has it built on to the bridge. I mean, you can remove it, as you can see, but it's not screwed on to the main plate. Like on the Valjoux 72, for example, they have a much longer, thinner looking one, a lot more delicate than this. I much prefer this one on the 861. It's a lot more forgiving. Just checking that it engages, which it does, and then I could screw it down. Little 9010, of course, onto the seconds runner. You don't need to oil the minute runner at all, because it barely moves, so you don't need that lubrication. Now, of course, I can build up the coupling. Now, I will say an interesting thing about this. When you look at the wheel for this and the pivots on it, they look exactly the same. They're actually not, and I'll tell you why. This is again the joys of editing. When I finished this, the chronograph didn't work and I wasn't too sure why, and then I realized that the height of the coupling was just too high against the driving wheel. So I removed the coupling, I removed the wheel, turned it upside down, rebuilt it, and it was absolutely perfect. And I was quite surprised because visually looking at it, it is the slightest little difference in size of the pinions on the pivots, on each side. It is next to nothing, but again, it makes all the difference. And it just simply didn't work. End of story, it did not work. So again, like I said, I had to remove it, reversed the wheel over, refilled it back together, put it back onto the movement, and it worked perfectly. Again, the joys of editing. But you guys also get it live with me as well, so don't complain. Don't complain now. So I was having another one of those days today where I was thinking, are we going into another heat wave or not? Because it's getting mad swampy in my place. That's not fresh. Seriously, things are sticky. Things are sticky that should not be sticky. And that's not how it should be. I've had 2 cold showers today just to cool off, and I think it was around 25 or something. I'm not that good with the heat, seriously. I don't know how people in super hot countries survive with it, because I just melt and I just feel ill, and yeah, not how it should be. But another thing though that I've started to do as well is I need to basically get more active. Now, I do go to the gym like at least 3 days a week, which is good, but I need to walk more. So I've started getting into more of a regime now as well, where it's like, if I'm going to do some work, I'm going to do like 4 hours, and then basically I need to go for a walk. So I'll drive to like a nearby park. Hear me out. I know I said drive, but I need to drive to the destination where I want to walk. So before you complain or laugh, I'm not saying that I drive and that's my exercise. No, sir, it's not. So I will drive to like a nice, cool looking place, and then I will basically walk. And I like it. It's relaxed. It's chill. The only problem that I don't like about it is I feel a little bit like out of place there, because what I've noticed is everybody that's there are just walking dogs. And I like dogs, but I don't have one. I have a cat, an old one, that is really old, and I can't take him out on a leash because he would just basically flop to the floor and I would just have to drag him everywhere and it would just be embarrassing. But when I'm out walking, it's nice to see the dogs and everything, but then at the same time, I must admit, I feel a little conscious sometimes that people look at me like, hey man, why are you just walking here on your own? It looks a bit weird. So I was thinking maybe I should get like a loner dog or something, like a hired dog. And then I could take it with me when I go for my walks and then just give it back without the responsibility. Anyway, it's just my 2 cents on that. But yeah, just my 2 cents. So I've just installing the rest of the chronograph parts and I've just built up the cam, adding in some of this 9354. I'm sure it's 9354. I'm going to have to check that. But off the top of my head, I'm sure it's 9354. And like I said before, it's really important as well that you are oiling your metal on metal parts, especially with a cam-based movement, because it's quite violent, basically. You'll see it. When you're firing up the chronograph, it's a lot of rubbing and pushing. It's not like a column wheel based. Not at all. Another thing as well, if you do use a little bit too much grease, clean off your mess, man. There's nothing wrong with using a little bit too much, as long as you're very aware that you've used too much, and then of course that you clean it up afterwards. Because, I mean, you've serviced the watch. The last thing you want to do is just completely gunk it. But I do like these 861s. I think it's a really, really nice movement to work on. I don't know if you guys own an 861. I'd say these are more common than, say, a Valjoux 72, for example. And yeah, they're a real pleasure to work on. Really, really nice movements. So getting towards the end, I am just building up and adding the springs for the chronograph mechanism. And as you can see, they are pretty tough springs. Again, making sure that they are all greased. And this one actually is 2 springs on 1 screw, so they're basically mounted on top of each other. You see how I swapped the screwdriver? The screwdriver was too small. And I was like, no, it's too small, you need to use a bigger one. I've mentioned this before. Try and use the right size screwdriver for the job that you're actually doing, or the screw that you're screwing in. Because if you don't, you're going to damage the head, and it just doesn't look nice. It's not nice. Little 1300 on the post. Just popping him in place, and then I can screw him down. Cleaning off any excess grease, as you can see. That's the beauty of Rodico, guys. Does everything. And we have a functioning chronograph. But like I said, when I was testing this before, because of that coupling issue, it wasn't working. But that's the beauty of watchmaking. It's all about learning and discovering, okay, it was working before, or why is this not working now, etc. And you obviously have to tackle the situation. So the movement's fully built up now, so I can basically refit the dial. And I love how this dial has turned out. Look at the patina on that dial, guys. The way that the tritium has created this effect over the entire dial. Because as far as I know, it's supposed to be just a grey dial, but it's put this kind of greeny kind of tinge over everything. And I think it just looks really nice because it's really even. That's the other thing about it. It's actually really even. It almost looks like a rocky face, which is really cool. So just adding all the chronograph hands on, I always do those first, making sure that everything's lined up, and then I can just push them down. They're all friction fit. And the reason I do that is because once I add on my hour hand, I need to make sure that I've not pushed it down too far so that it's not going to hit the little hands, the little chronograph hands. There needs to be space. All of the hands need to have their own little space. Otherwise, it will stop the watch when you run it. So checking everything, that everything is engaged correctly and nothing's hidden. And now I can obviously add on the white sweeper at 12 o'clock. Lining that up nicely. And then I can just push this on with a hand press tool. Quick test, and that's exactly what we want to see. Nicely snapping over. So moving into extra time now, I can refit the pushers. I'm going to add a little bit of Molykote grease into the hole where the pusher screw is going to go. Just gives it a little bit more flexibility when you're pushing it. Now, I did say to the guy that owns this, ideally you should replace these pushers in the future because they're not in the best condition, if I'm honest. And I'm talking about the caps, by the way, that's all. And we did get hold of a brand new original Omega crystal for the 145.020. It does have the Omega logo in the middle as well, so it is a fully original Omega crystal for this. And it's just press fit onto the case. The tacky bezel's obviously been put as well, as you can see, and then I can just press fit this into place. Didn't give me any problems whatsoever, I'm happy to say. And it's a little bit interesting because underneath, I think you saw it underneath the tacky, it had a little friction spring to kind of lift the tacky almost. Very strange. So casing up the watch, and I can put the big movement holder ring in there as well. Just making sure that that's all in place. Add in some grease to the winding stem. And then I can pop him in and tighten up the set-in lever screw. And we're nearly there, guys. We are nearly there. We have a nice looking, functioning watch. Case clamp screws going in. And the only thing that we really need to do is fit a new gasket. So I'm just measuring up, coming in at 34.5 mil. So yeah, I have some available, no problem. Grease that up. And the only other thing that we really need to do after this is obviously check it on the timographer. Now somebody recently mentioned to me, they were like, hey, how did it come you close up the case and you've not regulated the watch or anything? Quite simply because this is a video and I regulate the watch after 24 hours. But I can see already on this that it's given me a decent enough reading for me to know that it is going to be fine later on when I do the regulation. Now on this, as you can see, we've got an amplitude coming in the late 260s. I know that's going to jump up as well, and I'm more than happy with what I see. So there we have it, the Omega Seamaster Socket Timer, reference 145.020. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Guys, if you want to watch another restoration video, there's one on the screen right now. So if you still got your coffee with you, feel free to click and enjoy.